So I know what they're talking about. All right, I am going to call the Plan Commission meeting for September 7th to order. Roll call, please.
President Jay Linkoff.
Here.
President Kettlebolt.
Here.
President Trustee Brocius.
Here.
Commissioner Tupai.
Here.
Commissioner Johnson.
Here.
Commissioner Birkland.
Here.
And Commissioner Garcia.
All right, let's rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
She thought it was at the library for some reason. I'm just going to shoot her a quick check.
Okay, yeah, that's fine.
Because I went down there.
I went there.
Did you? Okay.
Yeah.
So if you and I went there, I feel like.
All right. So we have public comment. This is an opportunity for anyone to address the Plan Commission on any issue. Please observe the time limit of 3 minutes. While the Plan Commission encourages input from residents, it may not discuss or act on any issue that is not duly noticed on the agenda.
We do have a request for a public comment here. Mr. Tim Henneman.
There's a question mark on there in case something comes up.
Okay, so you don't want to.
I don't want to address anything right now.
Okay.
Address anything.
Okay. We will go to general business. Plan Commission training presentation. Bill and Brian, it's all up to you.
All right, then I'll go ahead and put that up on the screen, and then you can go off my laptop or.
Yes, sir. So broadly speaking, this covers kind of the powers that the Plan Commission has, talks a little bit about the existing plans that the village has already put together, and then talks a little bit about what individually we as the Plan Commission review and act on. And really this is geared towards not only a refresher for people who might have been on the Plan Commission for a long time, but also an opportunity for those of you who are new to the Plan Commission to be exposed to kind of the processes and what we would deal with on a pretty regular basis here. It is going to be high level and probably pretty quick in nature. There is opportunities for questions at the end. Please stop me during the presentation if you would like further clarification on anything. Otherwise, there's some helpful resources at the end that I think if you do have the opportunity to look through, those would be very valuable. So pretty much covered that next slide, but you can go to the next one. The village has a variety of different plans and different timeframes in which they do those plans. Capital improvements being the annual basis in relationship to usually the budgeting cycle. And this is capital improvements being roads, public facilities, utilities, those types of things. Every 5 years, the park and open space plan is updated. And this, again, obviously guides the future of park and recreation, not only within existing parks, but also where we would like to see new and future parks. And to maintain eligibility with the state to pursue grant opportunities, that has to be done every 5 years. And so the village does that every 5 years and does a great job at updating it. And so the last one was done in 2018. Comprehensive plan, wide scale, looks at the community as a whole, touches everything from land use, transportation, economic development, all the way down to natural resources, those types of things. And it's really the policy guide for the community for a 10-year stretch of time. And it's required to be updated every 10 years. This was also done lastly in 2018. And then as needed, there's obviously planning that occurs on an as needed basis. Some to highlight here, the market analysis, Main Street focus. This was an economic development related planning initiative back in 2017 that really focused on what types of new businesses could be facilitated in Cross Plains, in particular downtown. There's ongoing effort for a watershed clean infrastructure plan for Black Earth Creek, which is the village finds itself within that. So that's a larger scale initiative ongoing right now, in addition to the hazard mitigation plan, which plans for obviously the unpredictability of how we respond to natural disasters. And so All of those are kind of ongoing processes right now at a larger scale, and then some of the more specifics village-wide plans that we have already adopted. So cover everything from annual budgeting to how we want to see growth happen in the community or preservation happen in the community in relationship to land use decision making, economic development priorities. Like I just talked about, some regional initiatives. So we want the village to be involved in that, and Bill is involved in those two ongoing efforts. And then finally, zoning ordinance and map changes. We'll get into this in a little bit more detail upcoming, but basically that comprehensive plan must align with those changes that we make. And so we want that plan to be reflective of the current goals, objectives of the community. So then when we make changes, it's consistent with that. So that's why it's important to be updated on a regular basis. The Plan Commission powers are found in the state statutes. Just pulled out a couple of them for you to review, but in general, the master plan, what they're referring to here is that comprehensive plan that I just mentioned. So reporting recommendations related to that is a Plan Commission function. In addition to recommending, public improvements, which gets along the lines of that capital improvement planning process. Keeping a record of resolutions, those are things that Bill does, but when we have the kind of public input components, those are what we need to document and make sure that we hold public hearings and things like that in a formal way, and so they're documented. Entry upon land, this is probably going to be a very rare case, but in certain instances, there might be a site visit involved with a certain development or something like that, and so you do have the right as a Plan Commission to have that opportunity as well. And then get into each one of these in a little bit more depth, but generally speaking, these are the kind of things that the Plan Commission would review and make a recommendation to the village board. In some instances, you'd hold a public hearing. In other instances, we would not hold a public hearing. And then there's also the certain unique specific situations outside of these. In particular, an example would be last meeting where we talked about the park at Glacier's Edge. That is a unique situation that has come about. And so that's why this body addressed it outside of what is listed here.
Well, I thought the law changed in January on conditional use permits, and I didn't think the board had anything to do with it. I thought the Plan Commission did the public hearings and made the decision versus a recommendation to the board.
Did we make that change in the zoning code? Okay, so that is my apologies. I didn't know that, but yes, that's generally what we're advising communities to do based on that law change. Yes.
Okay.
But we leave it that it's still close to the board or no, with the law?
Well, yes, yes, we could, but in general, at this point in time, the state has really tied our hands in terms of what we can do in terms of denying it. And so we usually are recommending removing that from going to the village board, where it was more of a discretionary decision before, and now it's more of an administrative, really. So zoning, for those of you, I'm sure most of you are familiar with, but generally it regulates how land is used. Everything from how the land is used to how the building sits on the land itself. So setbacks, pretty common kind of example is you probably have a single family house that's zoned single family. It has a setback of a certain amount from the street or from the side property line. And those are all rules reflected in the zoning code itself. And so every parcel in the village is designated a certain zoning district. And the easiest way to think about it is the zoning ordinance has all of the rules, and the map is where those rules specifically apply to that situation. The village completed a zoning ordinance rewrite, I want to say 10 or 15 or so years ago, created some new districts, but mainly it falls in the line of regulating based on density. In addition to land use. So in terms of residential, we have single family, two family, multifamily. Those are different districts by the density in which that development would occur. And the same for commercial. So neighborhood would be a smaller scale commercial, whereas the community might be a larger scale, something like Walgreens, for instance. And then Main Street, you see that kind of traditional downtown vibe, and that's what that district is oriented to. In addition to industrial being kind of along the same lines. We also have two unique districts, conservation being areas we want to preserve for open space long-term, and then rural holding being parcels that are brought into the city and are still in an agricultural use. So those would be something, for instance, if we annex, or if a property owner requested an annexation of a parcel that was a big farm right now and it's not ready for development at this current juncture, then we would zone it rural holding for the time being to allow that agricultural use to continue until they wanted to do something in the future, if they chose to do something in the future.
So a good example of that was Scenic Valley, when it was annexed a while ago, that stayed in rural holding 35 until recently when it was, the plat was approved for that. And then we rezoned it to to single family and light industrial.
And then finally, overlay districts. These are basically rules in addition to what the districts have, and they're basically to protect natural resources in the community and wellheads, things like that. We don't necessarily want a big industrial user right next to our wells because that could potentially contaminate it. And so those rules are in place on top of the existing zoning in some instances around the community. The map basically shows where the zoning is applied. You've got yellow being the residential, so the most bright yellow, I guess, is the single family. And then you see the kind of tannish brown, that's the 2-family to multifamily. Commercial is in that red and pink areas. And then you have industrial in the grays. We'll talk a little bit more specifically about planned development, which is shown in purple in a couple of slides, because that's a unique zoning district that's already been established for that particular site. So amendments come along from time to time. They're not a regular basis thing that we would necessarily look at even once a month or every 6 months, but they do come up from time to time. And usually they're to address issues that we find in the ordinance. For example, the subdivision ordinance that we reviewed last meeting, we found some ways we wanted to modernize our practices, and so we applied those changes at that time. In addition to law changes, which was just referenced, we want to bring the code in compliance with those when they do occur. Map changes are usually on a case-by-case basis in relationship to a property either coming into the village, which was not previously in the village, or a property that's already in the community, but a property owner has requested a change in that zoning. And so all of those changes, again, need to be consistent with what we've got outlined in the comprehensive plan. Conditional use permits, we've experienced some recent changes in the state level laws related to this, and those were directly kind of in about 2017. Basically, like we had just talked about, they kind of hamstrung the community to say if it meets the zoning requirements, then we have to approve it. But in theory, what the conditional use process was created to do is kind of say it depends. It might be a good idea in this location. It might be a bad idea in this location, to give us an additional review step. Whereas a by right is something that we know fits the community character in that location. And so a change in use wouldn't necessarily require us to have that extra level of review, whereas a conditional use would. So within the ordinance itself, you'll see within each land use, there's specifically called out requirements that need to be met for a conditional use to be approved. And so that would be something that Bill would write up in a report, and it would say how they meet those requirements that are outlined in that. There is opportunities to add additional conditions, but we cannot remove conditions. So this is different than what we'll talk about in a little bit in terms of the plan development. But in terms of the regulations that are written in the code, for that conditional use to be approved, we need to have them meet those requirements, and we can't waive or relax them. That would be through a plan development.
Can I just ask a real question on it? So for the single family resident, let's say there's a 35-foot offset between the street and the house property.
Yeah.
somebody wants a conditional use permit to make that 20 feet, but our zone says 35, so, well, so we can deny that because our zoning is specific, but if they're coming by with a conditional use permit that meets our zoning, then we have to approve it, right?
Yeah, in that instance, they would probably be going for a variance instead of a conditional use permit.
Oh, okay.
And that is a different level of through the Board of Zoning Appeals, and that has to prove a hardship. So you have to prove that there's some reason that you can't meet the zoning requirements. Conditional use kind of example would be if, for example, a new land use was proposed that didn't meet the parking requirements, and they needed to add additional parking spaces. They said they couldn't do that. We couldn't waive that requirement at that time. They'd have to meet the requirement. So if they needed the 3 extra spaces, they need to facilitate that on the site to meet the zoning ordinance and then approve the conditional use permit. Yeah.
So our code specifically states what is allowed under conditional uses. So when you look up the district, say for example, commercial district, it'll list the specific uses that are allowed by right, and then the specific uses that are allowed by conditional use permit. And so that kind of says, which track it goes on to. Now, if a use that they are proposing can't meet the minimum standards in that district, then at that point they have a decision to make whether or not they're going to go for a variance or whether they're going to change the zoning so that they can get that. And so if they go for a change in zoning, then that comes here, because that's a legislative matter. However, if they ask for a variance, then it goes to the Board of Zoning Appeals because that's a judicial matter.
Okay.
Yeah, so just example conditions, these are all written out in the zoning ordinance, but parking, design, lighting, outdoor storage, those types of things are very typical standards. For example, we would require that a garbage container outside be screened, basically, so it has some sort of a little fence around it or something like that, rather than just being in the parking lot standing alone or something like that. So plan development, and this is where we can deviate from the zoning regulations itself. So it basically provides the flexibility to customize the zoning to best fit the project as the business owner or development has proposed. It requires a couple of extra steps, but this is the way that's built into the zoning ordinance to most effectively allow for those changes to make place, where we make some trade-offs in terms of, all right, you might want a higher density here or a shorter setback, but we're gonna ask you for a little bit higher design standards on the outside of the building, for example, something like that. And it basically what it does is it takes the base zoning, whatever that is. So for example, downtown, the newer mixed use building that's apartments on the 2 upper floors and commercial on the main floor, that required a planned development because it was a higher density than what was allowed in the zoning district. So we allowed that to happen through the planned development process, but we took it through the process to look at how does the site work in terms of access, in terms of parking, in terms of specific requirements that needed to be changed to allow that development to happen. And so that creates a unique zoning district that's based on one of our existing districts, but has unique flexibilities built into it. And so, like I said, it's a little bit more of a lengthy process, but generally speaking, we would review it at this level, at a concept level, just get general feedback, and then we would talk about the general development plan, which essentially is that zoning, that unique zoning being established. So this is where we would say, all right, the setback in the district is 30 feet, they need 20 feet, and so that's specifically written into the new zoning for that property, which is called the GDP. The specific implementation plan, this gets into the more detailed components, design, layout, landscaping, those types of things. And so that would be where we would see a full site plan, we would see an elevation, something like that, and we'd look at it and say, all right, this is what we'd like to see, and that's built into that plan development specifically. So that is all written out in documentation to run with the property as it's now being rezoned technically.
So the SIP doesn't need to be approved by the board?
It does.
Yeah.
It does? Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, just saw.
Oh,
It says
yeah.
plan commission and city council, SIP just. I wasn't sure.
Yeah, sorry, that is a little bit confusing, but yes, both of those steps go to the village board. And, you know, in some instances, we might take both of those steps at the same time. In certain instances, we might separate them because of the need of the property owner or whatever it might be. Land division, there's two general components of land division. This being the smaller scale and certified survey map, or a CSM as it's commonly referred to. This is when we're talking about 4 or less lots. So the typical instance would be you got a 40-acre lot and you're splitting it in half into 2 20-acre lots. That would require a CSM. Versus a subdivision where you would split maybe 1 or 2 parcels into 50 or 60, like you have shown there. And so the subdivision plat requires 2 steps, whereas the certified survey map is only 1 step. And the subdivision has the preliminary plat and the final plat, which if you were around for the creek crossing or any of the previous ones, that's kind of the general how that process has come about. So the comprehensive plan, like I mentioned, is updated every 10 years. This is that process is a lot more lengthy and requires us to rewrite, but we have to update the document, you know, as a whole. Versus there's amendments that may be required from time to time. And so in general, when we're talking about the update, that is for the entire document. Amendments are for one specific component of the document, like you would think of a zoning change might take place. This map I know is hard to read and there's a lot there, but generally what I wanted to show is that it aligns very closely to what you see in terms of the zoning. So the yellow is the residential, you have the red being commercial, and then you have the blue being, or purple being planned mixed use, and the kind of hashed brown being planned neighborhood. So these are areas that we want to provide a variable amount of different opportunities for different types of development to occur. But we also want them to fall into those kind of categories. And so you'll see if we do get a zoning map change requested, that will reference what the future land use map has indicated for that. If it doesn't match, then we need to update the comprehensive plan first so that a rezoning would be consistent with the plan itself.
So Ben?
Yeah.
So this is not necessarily reflective of just the village, right? It's also areas for future development outside of our village.
Correct.
So we're thinking this is what we'd like to see eventually.
Yeah, so the comprehensive plan has in general a 20-year outlook. And so it intends to help guide development for the next 20 years. This is more development than we're going to see in 20 years, and we know that. But what we take as an approach is to show where we want to see development occur over that time period, with a little bit of flexibility built in to say, all right, this parcel property owner doesn't want to develop, they want to stay at ag or whatever it might be. And so it never comes to fruition, but maybe this area does. And so we show a little bit more development than we know is going to take place. But yes, we generally show where the village wants to grow and how it can grow in terms of, you know, utility constraints and topography and things like that.
Cool, thank you.
So just quickly, this shows village growth, so it doesn't have a jurisdiction on properties that are still in the township.
Yep.
So just want to make sure that clear, and we'll be talking about the official map later here. But this is there's a separate tool called that is intergovernmental zoning, where you have a separate commission. That's not what this is.
right? Yes, these property owners can do what they want in the town, but if they want to come into the village, this is how we would guide that development to occur in the village. Amendments, like I said, a little bit more of a lengthy process. There is a 30-day public notice period that needs to occur. Kind of a unique statutory component is that where I had mentioned a lot of the public hearings for the other steps occurring before the plan commission, it is required to happen before the village board for these amendments. However, we typically take the approach of including the plan commission in that meeting, so then they can make a recommendation that reflects what they heard in the meeting and not do it as a separate component. And then finally, just a quick summary of all of these different components. So we talked a lot about the comprehensive plan. That is a policy guide that helps us to identify opportunities for prioritization in terms of new ideas and ways we can help strive towards the village's vision and goals. And the zoning ordinance is a way to implement that. In addition to the subdivision ordinance is also a way to implement that. Zoning specifically related to land use and things occurring within the city. Subdivision is directly related to land division inside the city and inside the city's extraterritorial jurisdiction, which extends approximately 1.5 miles from the existing boundary. And that's another subject that we'll get to later today on the agenda here. But essentially the maps, the zoning map shows what the zoning is out there, or what the zoning is written within the zoning ordinance, whereas the comprehensive plan has that future land use map and some policy guides. And then the subdivision map is, or the subdivision ordinance is reflective of the parcel map itself.
What is the ETJ?
That is the extraterritorial jurisdiction. So that is the areas 1.5 miles outside of the village's boundary. Yes. And so other resources, if you do get a chance, I would recommend at least glancing at the comprehensive plan and the zoning ordinance. If you haven't had a chance to do that, those are all found on the village website. If you would like to dive a little bit deeper into specific documents and tools that are out there for Plan Commission members, Wisconsin Extension and Stevens Point both have a lot of resources out there that are very helpful tools. And obviously, I'm a resource for you guys in addition to the rest of village staff as well.
So just the UW Wisconsin, UW Stevens Point land use booklet for Plan Commission. I do have those printed out. Those are $300, 300 pages worth of documents. So I do have those for you if you would like.
And before COVID, they were doing Plan Commission trainings twice a year, usually held one in Madison. I don't know exactly what they're doing right now, but we could look into that if there is any interest. It would cover a lot of what we just did today, but it's an opportunity to ask, probably some legal experts and other land use experts in the state some specific questions if you had that, if you wanted that opportunity.
Any other questions for Brad? Thank you very much, sir.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Approval of the minutes from the August 2nd, 2021 Plan Commission meeting.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same. Number 3, discussion and possible action regarding the extraterritorial jurisdiction certified survey map review for lands on and around 8067 Highway 14 Cross Plains. Bill, you want to just?
Yeah, so we have received this request from the county to review extraterritorial jurisdiction. This is a locator map. This is where the property is located. It's right on that boundary. approximately 1.5 miles away. What they intend to do here is split this lot and create lot number 2, which is this here, from the larger parcel. This lot 1 is existing, and I believe this access easement area is part of lot 1 currently. This is the aerial map of what is there currently. So our chapter 83 requires the village approved extraterritorial jurisdiction overview. As you see on the agenda, we do not yet have an official map. However, upon review, I think we did not receive any information about what they're proposing to do there, besides just splitting the lot. But as you can see, the Black Earth Creek comes to the property there.
And in general, the town of Cross Plains is in Dane County zoning, which has a limited number of splits, meaning that land division can only occur a certain amount of times on a property. And so through that process, Dane County keeps track of all of those. And so they're pretty vigilant as to knowing if a parcel has the opportunity to be split off or not. And so with this request, I would also recommend approval based on what Bill had described too, because we really want to look at things in our extraterritorial jurisdiction that would affect directly planning related to how the village grows and develops. And this parcel is significantly far away, as you can see from where that village kind of extent of growth is likely to occur. And so if we had an official map that had designated something like a roadway through this parcel or something like that, then we would have a little bit more power and control in terms of saying, here's where we would like some dedicated right of way, for instance, for a future development or something like that. I don't see that being the case with this one. And so that's why I would recommend approval.
Judy?
So on lot number 2, that's 5.1 acres. Is that buildable? And they can build, that's a split so that they can build another house on that? Because it doesn't need to be 40 acres anymore, right? So they can build on that lot? That's part of the purpose.
I would assume that's the purpose, but I don't know that for.
What's the
So-
FP1 zoning that's they propose that? Is that farmland preservation something?
Yeah, yep.
So they'd have to get it rezoned.
Yes.
I think you just drop out of the program if it's, unless it's zoned that way or are they in the program. The farmland preservation is a program.
I'm just wondering, it says proposed FP1.
Yeah,
Oh.
that's the zoning, yeah.
What the zoning that was.
Yeah, so that would be for an agricultural zoning district.
Good luck to them getting in and out of their track.
I see something of interest. It's not so much on the split. I see sewer easement. Is there really a sewer line this far out?
What are you reading that?
Right in the upper right corner, it says sewer easement.
No, I don't think that there's sewer all the way out here. That's probably for like a holding or a tank.
No,
I'm guessing maybe, is that an easement so that lot 1 can run to their existing, holding tank or
Yeah.
septic through lot 2?
Because lot 1 doesn't, I don't think lot 1 has enough other 2 acres.
That was, when I saw that, or that's what my assumption was, isn't that, is that part of lot 2 or is that, or maybe the other way
Well,
around?
that's what I'm trying to figure out where the actual border is. It looks like it's on, to me, it looks like it's in lot 1. And I don't know why you would have an easement on your own lot.
Yeah, we don't have sewer there, so. I know we don't have sewer there. And I don't know, I don't believe that the town of Cross Plains would have any sewer out there either.
Well, like I say, it was striking to me that I saw that, so I'm just curious about that. Maybe the pipe's not there, but I'd be curious if that goes on to all the other properties where there's an easement all along Highway 14. I can't imagine Madison Metro Sewer District might, but it would be certainly nice if that was the case. All right, I just saw that and that kind of struck me, and it looks like dotted line, so it looks like, to me, it looks like it's a pipe, and I don't know why you would need that if it's the septic for lot 1. I could see an easement going from lot 2 to lot 1.
The symbol right next to the word survey looks like it's a septic vent. That's what that symbol is.
Well, no, the vent is a diamond with a cross in it.
That's a circle. Is that what that symbol is?
No, it's, to me, mine, it says septic vent is a square with a cross in it.
Up here, so that's a well there, or is it a septic tank? Last ones I can't see, yeah, a little bigger.
Well, I don't want to waste time. I know people want to go to the other meeting going on tonight.
Yeah, that symbol there, that's the one you scroll up, you'll see it's gonna say septic tank. Right there.
Yeah, I don't, well, we can take a look at it.
Well, I'm just, like I say, it caught my,
Yeah. No,
caught my eye. All right, does someone want to make a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion for this.
I do have a second.
I'll second.
All right, I have a motion and a second for approval. Any other discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, same, so moved. All right, number 4, discussion and possible action regarding construction start and finish time. I asked for this to be put on the agenda due to some concerns with Creek Crossing, and once again discovered that our ordinance allows basically construction from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. 7 days a week. Now, what we have done to correct that, we have done agreements, and I think they've just been handshake agreements to restrict the hours. So I would like to see that as a written document inside the zoning code. There is noise, but it all is based on the noise after the construction has been done. So I think we should add something to that on what we as a village would think are reasonable construction hours. So that's why it's on there. So, Judy?
I know in the summer months, I think, like, it's still light out at 9. I think 7's too early if people want to get stuff done, to be quitting, I should say. But I don't know about 7 a.m. starting. I feel like that's pretty early, but I don't know.
Can we get some definition around what construction is and whether or not this is contractor via large construction, or are we talking about single family building construction?
I'll be honest, I would cover all of it. While 9 o'clock it might be light, I think a lot of people are putting their kids down to bed between 7:30 and 8. And to have, I don't know if you've ever lived next to construction, I certainly have with 2 young kids, and it was frustrating. I think there's standards, and I think it's unreasonable to have people moving dirt and the beeping of that at 9 o'clock at night. That's my feeling. I would make it more 7 to 7 on weekdays, maybe something like 9 to 5 o'clock on Saturday and nothing on Sunday. I mean, that's me coming from what I think is reasonable in people who live near these and want to continue their life, considering some of these projects go on 2-3 years. What's up?
What were the hours that we set for the ATV ordinance as far as the noise concerns?
That was 8 to 8, I thought.
Sorry, 8
That's
p.m.
right, yeah.
Oh,
But now at the same token too, if I'm deciding to build my house by myself, I would only have weekends to work, so I would have to work on Sundays to build a house.
Yeah, I don't see any reason to not have construction at all on Sunday, I guess.
all right.
Saturday and Sunday seem
Somewhere.
I mean, I work 14, 15-hour days to get my house built.
Yeah, no, I guess what I'm saying is I think some people, there needs to be, I think, a break from noise pollution. I think people have a right to sleep in at least one day out of 7. So I don't mind if we have them on Sunday, but I would like to have it later then.
And I don't see an issue saying started at 10 o'clock,
Okay.
something like that. That wouldn't bother me. But I think we have to have it available for the homeowner who does wish to work on.
Other thoughts?
What about construction for like emergencies, like that big storm that came through?
Well, that's emergencies, everything's set aside.
Okay.
Everything's set aside for that. And you gotta remember, these are kind of guidelines and stuff, so clearly an emergency, we're gonna work around the clock to get it.
People are cutting their trees at 5 a.m. because they gotta move them from the road, yeah.
Right. That's understandable. It's stuff that is optional.
Okay,
I'd probably support like 8 o'clock at night. Just with that, I think that I can see 9 to go later, like 7 might be a little too late. Starting
I agree.
7 a.m. maybe again. something like that.
On weekdays or weekends?
Weekdays, and then weekends I could support slightly reduced hours, whether it's starting later and earlier, or, but I agree Sunday should be, there should be some window on Sundays.
Okay, Bill?
So, a couple questions. One is, what is the time frame between when they can actually get and start construction and when they can stop? Or, because it changes from like subdivision to homes, right? Homes, they can do 365, but a subdivision, we're saying that they gotta have certain aspects done before end of September.
Well, October. End of
October. Right, so I think we need to take that into account of, I don't think we can have a blanket that says everything, because there are differences between building a house and building a subdivision or building a commercial property. In my opinion, I think that
We could drag the project out longer by limiting the time, I think is what you're getting at. By saying they can only work till 8 o'clock at night.
But we've already, our shake hand deal with the last, I don't know how many developments have been 7 to 7. That's what we put in the handshake or the development agreement, so it's been working. And we just extended, it used to end at September 15th, and now we've extended it to October. I personally, noise is noise. To me, if it's for a development or a house or a commercial building, it's still noise. And I think there's restrictions, and the restrictions we have in our noise ordinance right now is 7 to 9. So the question is, that's what we've been living with. The question is that reasonable? And we have not thought it's been reasonable because we make people do a handshake deal that they're gonna not do that.
so if we're gonna do that, we should change the noise ordinance as well.
Well, no, because the noise ordinance covers everything, including loud stereo, including bar music,
Light bands.
yeah, it includes everything. So I'm not looking to touch that because that's really should go to public safety. What I'm looking at is adding to the zoning code, which is definitely in this commission's right. And right now it has very detailed requirements on how much noise can be made once the building is done. I mean, it's very strict on that. And I guess I'm just saying that I understand the need to open up that noise when you're under construction. It'd be unreasonable, but I do think we should give people a break on the noise, and there should be peace and quiet after. It's 84.111, Bill, if you want to pull it up.
So the other thing that I wanted to add to that.
Yep.
Is as of September 21st, we're past autumnal equinox, and we start losing more light per day. So I would say if you're going to do 7 to 7, I would say 7 to 7 or a half hour before sunset, whichever is longer. Or shorter.
I mean, people can still do work in the dark. I don't
Yeah, they got
wanna,
lights.
yeah, you know, if people are comfortable with 7 to 8 on weekdays, I certainly can live with that. I'd like to, what people think is, and I hear Sunday you want something. I've heard 10 o'clock, what, 10 o'clock to 5 o'clock? You're looking at, or I suppose we should do at least a 8-hour
An
day.
8-hour day.
Yeah, because yours would be even more restrictive, because when you throw the clock back.
Right.
So I'm not looking, I'm just trying to get where I think at 8 o'clock, things should be quiet. You know, we should start bringing down the noise and neighborhoods should settle down a little bit. I mean, and that was Seth, you brought up a good point with ATVs. We don't want them, but yet we are okay with, you know, the beeping of those big constructions. So I'm very comfortable with going to the 8 o'clock. You know.
I like the 8 o'clock.
And everybody, I'm okay with starting at 7, even though it can wake you out, but.
So Jay, just
Yeah.
quickly here, the zoning ordinance talks about continuous noise.
Right,
So that's like, if a development has, say, a turbine.
Right, no, I understand it, but that's what I said, it was after the construction's done. Yeah, but what I'm saying is, since we have a noise or part of zoning, there's nothing that stops us from adding something on the construction side of it.
I just, and then maybe you can speak to this, but because the zoning is a land use, I don't know if it necessarily regulates for during construction time. Unless we.
How could it not? We restrict on how deep the hole's gotta be, how deep the sand's gotta be, why wouldn't you?
Well, we gotta figure out where the most proper place to put that would be.
Right.
So, for example, our current ordinance restricting construction noise lives in the village-wide noise ordinance. Chapter 22.
I'm gonna disagree with you because we don't apply that. We don't. Right now, if they were still doing construction after 7 o'clock, you would be calling them up. And I told the residents, it's 7 o'clock end. What are we doing it on? A handshake. So we're not really being governed by the noise ordinance then. The noise ordinance says they can go to 9.
Correct, yes. I mean, but as far as writing a change to the ordinance and placing it for enforcement, we need to figure out which ordinance is proper for that. Because the way that we would change it would be different. If it lives in the zoning ordinance and we amend the zoning ordinance, there's certain parameters that we have to go to public hearing. Whereas if it's in the subdivision ordinance or say the noise ordinance, we can do that without going to public hearing.
I have no problem going to the public hearing. I'm just telling you that noise ordinance in there is to govern really the public nuisance type of noise. I think that is used by law enforcement, if I'm not mistaken. I can't get exactly the wording that's in there, but that is built more for law enforcement. I'm looking at it, what I'm trying to do is get rid of the handshake. I mean, number one, okay? Because we're gonna get sued. All of a sudden, if you're gone, the next guy says, no, we want you to stop at 5 o'clock. Someone's gonna say, well, you allowed this one and this one to do it. There's no documentation whatsoever. So I'm trying to get it where it's documented. Someone can look at our zoning ordinance and here are the rules. There's not the discretion and that kind of stuff. Here are the rules. And I don't see why noise is any different than everything we regulate in that 200-page ordinance.
Yeah, we'll take a look at it.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about, but I just want to get a feel from this group on if they think that what is reasonable. So, but I just don't think we should be doing handshakes anymore. People just sue every time. That's where I'm coming from, Bill, on that. And if Paul says it should be a subsection of.
Well, I'm thinking a couple, it's probably gonna have to exist a couple of places. I mean, in order for our 22 to be compliant with that, we'd have to change 22. Because the language specifically states 7 to 9.
Yeah.
And then we'll have to change, it could potentially live in the chapter 31, which is the building construction ordinance. And then.
Is there a noise part in that?
There's not.
Oh, okay, because
And then-
that was the only two I saw.
Yeah, and then also then in the subdivision to take care of the large contractors.
Okay,
So then you would have it in a couple places. But again, we'll figure that out. I mean, it's,
I just think it's good to fix problems before they become problems.
Is there anything about like legal holidays? Needs to be different.
No, I mean, right now it's 7 to 9, any day of the week, anytime.
I'm saying for if we propose something for.
Right, if we want.
I would think maybe Sundays and holidays have the same. I mean, my position, I would say nothing on holidays, but then again, if someone's building their house on July 4th, I don't care, there's so many fireworks, but if it's, maybe Thanksgiving, I don't want to hear a buzzsaw maybe next door, I don't know, like I say.
Raising it as.
No, it's a good point. I guess I'd throw holidays and Sundays in together. I mean, people like to bring family together and be outside and, I think we have to respect everybody. And I just think noise can be a big problem. And I certainly hear about it sometimes. So let me just, we'll look to see where it goes, but so we're kind of just on spitballing and we can talk about it again, but we're kind of looking at 7 to 8 weekdays and maybe like a 9 to 6 on Saturday and maybe a 10 to 6 on Sunday and holidays. Is that kind of in the ballpark what everybody's thinking?
Just do like 9 to 6 on weekends and holidays, just to, so many.
Oh yeah, there you go. Yeah, then there's not, yeah, that makes sense. All right, so we're not gonna take any action, we'll just do the discussion. Bill and I'll see what's the best and I'll have to look at 22 again, but I thought that was more of a general thing, but.
It's the general, I mean,
Yeah.
it's peace and good order is
Yeah.
what it is, and it controls all noise.
Right.
There's a particular section in noise that talks specifically about construction noise.
Oh,
So that's.
but it's tied to the same though, right? The 7 to 9?
Yeah, that's where it comes from. That's not found anywhere else in our
Right.
code of ordinances. So even the zoning code doesn't
No,
talk about it.
but it has a noise standard section. Which,
For continuous.
Yeah.
It's an end result of that development
Right.
is noise producing use.
Right.
We would regulate that.
right. All right, very good. So discussion regarding the village's official map. So this is business that was started in 2009 and I'd like this group to finish it. I don't know, we sure are cleaning up a lot of things that were kicked down the road, weren't there? And I understand when that happened, why they did it, because of the big talk of the bypass of Highway 14, but that was decided quite a while ago. All right, so what do, I guess we start with the 2009 and kind of work forward from that, huh?
Yeah, so, I mean, I have in there comments about the most recent subdivisions and making sure that we incorporate those into it. We have plans that have since been adopted, like the park and open space plan. But what I've also included here was CARPC's environmental maps. They have current urban service areas and then future. Wanted to just run this past the plan commission to see if there are any areas that we need to identify. What we'll do from here is also run it across utilities, streets, etc., to make sure that the future plans, are what the map shows. And so again, in regards to the extraterritorial jurisdiction authority, 1.5 miles, really looking at when people go to subdivide their land, which areas should the village reserve for special purposes.
Right, so this is one of our few powers left as a village in terms of kind of helping shape what utilities, roads look like beyond our current borders. And what it really does is when we map these areas on the map, for instance, we show like a 100-foot right of way through a parcel or something that is a logical connection from one place to another in terms of where we see a future road taking place. Then when that land division would come about, we would ask that there be the possibility of dedicating that area to the village, and then the village would have to buy that right of way if they so chose at that time. So then we would have the ability to build the road in the future. That's kind of the most typical instance in which this would be applied. And really, this is a helpful tool for us to not only understand where we want to grow and how we can grow in terms of utilities, but also gives us a little bit additional power when these instances may come about where maybe a town subdivision is planned and that area we have identified for a future well site because it fits all of the criteria that match where we can logically put a next well. And in that situation, we want to avoid being basically that land being taken away or being used for a different use that would prohibit the ability to use it for a well in the future. And so that's the kind of what the official map does. And what it does is it takes the adopted maps from the comprehensive plan and the park and open space plan, like Bill mentioned. We combine that with other studies, utility studies and things like that. And we identify areas on the map within that 1.5 miles where we see the need for these things to take place in the future. And so this is one of our opportunities to kind of plan for the future and have a little bit of power behind it. And we would review that on a case-by-case basis if it ever happened in terms of being located in these areas.
So, yeah, I see this as one of our top priorities. We need to get this done. It's just so important, I think.
So some of the items that do come up here that are not very traditional as far as official mapping and when you look at roads and stuff, but the community does thrive on trails. So looking at trail systems to connect the village across Plains to other municipalities could be a consideration. Another thing is that we understand that we are severely impacted by flooding. And so identifying stormwater retention, detention basins, wetland habitat restoration areas that we can scientifically prove to have a major impact on the village, should be added in there, and so that we can reserve that from development, whether or not that's in the village or outside of the village, but within our 1.5 mile. And so we'll add areas. We did conduct a flood study for the village in 2019, and so we'll add those areas with future infrastructure in there into the map. And I also want to note that this is not the official map doesn't only impact the 1.5 extraterritorial jurisdiction, but it also impacts in the village where potentially a building could be there now, as an example, and we want to say put a drainage pipe there. So then what that would do is when a building permit comes in, I would check the official map and would not approve the building permit, but then there would be an opportunity for the village to acquire that property for a future project. And so that goes to speak, roads, trails, etc. Yeah, so it's a very powerful tool. And then again, how this works is when reviewing that certified survey map, as we did previously, we will look to this map to identify if that division is impacted by our map.
Go ahead, Bill.
So what's considered a urban service area?
So urban service area is directed by CARPC, which is the Capital Area Regional Planning Commission. The USA urban service area is the area within for which they've approved for us to have urban water or urban sewer service.
Right, so we have to prove, every time we want to amend that, we have to prove that there's the ability, capacity-wise, to serve that with our existing utilities before it can be amended. So essentially what that boundary is the areas we can serve with village utilities, that we can prove we can serve with village utilities.
Whether they're in our village or not?
Most of them are within the village. I don't know in particular if there's areas.
Well, so there are, I mean, so there's this section here, so every time that a developer comes to us and say they are looking to annex, we make them go through the steps of getting the urban service area amended in preparation for anticipation of the annexing to the village. So, for example, here you can see that Sundance is in the village's urban service area, but it's not yet annexed to the village. Right. Well, when we signed that pre-annexation agreement and went through the process of the preliminary plat, before we considered the preliminary plat, we made them go and make sure that they can get into the urban service area. Now you can be in the urban service area and not be in the village.
Correct. So I'm looking at Hillebrand, right?
Yep.
You go south from Bergen Road and go down.
Yep.
Yep. And so that box right there is not in the village, that's in the town. So are you saying that could potentially,
assuming that the map is accurate, that the line is accurate, then the portion that's in could potentially be annexed and serviced if everything else is approved. So,
okay.
So the urban service area is just one of the steps.
Okay.
And that probably was when all of this was annexed, that was probably done with some anticipation at that time. Or there has to be a reason for that amendment. It has to be requested.
Sure.
So the only way that the DNR will let a sewer extension take place is if it's within the urban service area.
Okay.
Any other questions? So you'll be seeing this quite a bit in the future as we work on it.
Yeah, we've got good baseline data and a good start with the previous version, but obviously we'll need to update and customize that moving forward.
Well, and we can use all this studies that we spent thousands and thousands of dollars and incorporate it. And can we use this new software to do the overlays and everything?
Yeah, so this map here is basically layers upon layers of data. And so once we get this, the changes made to this, I believe Vanderwall has the base layer for this. We'll have them make the changes and then we'll live stream it into our GIS system.
Okay.
So that anyone can look at the map and utilize the map accordingly.
Okay, very good.
So this 2010, obviously, that's not been approved, right? That was
correct. That was
off last time.
Correct.
It was a draft version that got nearly completed and then it got derailed, and so it stopped because there was a proposed bypass on there, and that was not what the.
Do you know?
Makes sense.
The proposed road that's shown coming out on 14 to the east of the village, did someone actually look at the topography and figure out if and where one connection could possibly be made there?
I think if I remember, that was when Meridian was gonna put the 250 houses in. They wanted to go down the hill to that. It, you know, it didn't go real far, and the DOT was at that time not supporting it. So, but it never really developed because they pulled out.
Because they wanted to connect with the airport, right? So what you're saying, they want to go through.
Well, they wanted to go, but remember, they wanted to also come down the hill, I forgot.
They
One
wanted
day,
the Valentine's.
yeah, that's it,
We
yeah.
wanted to connect with Highway 14, and we're all like, well, I don't think that's gonna happen, because it's awful steep, and they thought they'd find the money to make it work, right? They
But
didn't.
they
I was
also
just
wanted to
curious
go
where that-
Yeah, then they, yeah, airport road would be straightened out, yeah, but
So that'd be something that we could take up.
DOT would not allow that. Yes?
Okay, as long as you mentioned this road coming out of 14. Who puts these other roads up there, like coming off of Brewery Road up on the hill? That comes out on Sundance and then goes down the Stone Valley Road and heads over towards the other place.
Well,
You know, somebody drew those. in.
no, that, if you remember, the very first time Sundance was proposed, one of the restrictions is they had to have a second way in, and that was one of the options that they were looking to do. And the other one was going down and hitting KP.
Okay.
But again, those were,
We can't
Taken off the
erase
map.
those for now and then worry about.
no, I clearly think there should be, if that up there, gets developed and continues to get developed, I would think in 20 years, we might want to run a road to hit Hilltop. I mean, you don't want everything coming down Brewery, do you?
No, but.
Okay.
Well,
So there's only two options, right? You either gotta go to KP or you go down to Hilltop.
well, I mean, that's right, but, I'd rather see it be a horse ranch anyway. But yeah, in 20 years, it'd be fine. I'm not gonna have any complaints about it.
Well, and that's what this is. This is to look outside really, to just say, these are possibilities, so when someone wants to do something and we don't think it's gonna be good for the village, we have something to stand on.
Okay,
To modify it or,
out of sight, out of mind. You know, just like when you look down on the bottom part of the map where you say, well, that box coming out of that development is there for some reason, but there's no dotted lines coming over to P. On the south side. 40, yeah, that box right there. No,
The blue one from East Hill.
on the
Urban services.
west side, right there. On that development, you know, there's that one box you have on the other map that there's no
that one I have no answer
dotted
to that.
lines.
Yeah, I have no answer to that. And again, we're gonna have to update it and do it, but this is for future vision. It's not for, I mean, we wanna get it accurate to what we have now, but it's really, this committee's gotta look
I'm
future.
on that.
Yeah,
I just prefer outside out.
And the one thing to consider, so we don't know exactly everything that's going to happen in the future. What this does is it reserves at least the opportunity to have this discussion when and if that portion of land gets developed. And if you look at these are large infrastructure impacts. So when you're not looking at a arterial street per se. You're looking at a major collector section that has a high impact.
What's the image on page 42? Which is the last page.
So the last page here is the expanded future reservations from CARP C. Everything in green, if we were to go to CARP C for an amendment to the urban service area, would be recommended by CARP C or required by CARP C to be included in the urban service or the environmental protection corridor. Everything in blue is preferred but not required by CARP C. And so when when we go and ask them for an urban service area, they're gonna come back and they're gonna say, these are the areas for which you're required to include in the environmental protection area. And then they're gonna look at the scientific data and they're gonna look at this map.
And that's not to say that there's no opportunities in the blue for development to take place. If it can be properly mitigated, the impacts, then we need to prove that at that time. The green, less likely to be able to move that line.
Sure.
Because those are likely floodplains or drainage ways, things like that.
So you can see how much blue and green
Yeah,
exists around the village.
Right. Would some of that be like hilltop too, or?
yes.
Steep slopes,
Yeah.
hillside protection,
Okay.
parks,
they got
wetlands.
about 12 things that fall under that category of attributes that make up the corridor.
Gotcha, okay, thank you.
But yeah, I think that illustrates perfectly the kind of limited opportunities that the village has to grow. And so if we don't plan for where utilities and roadway connections need to take place, we might get stuck in an area where we're just stuck. We can't do anything anymore. And we don't want to see no development happen, kind of thing.
Anything else from anybody?
I guess, what do you want us to do in the short term with the map? Like, spend some time with it and then it's gonna be coming up on future meetings to make more specific decisions, or?
I guess what I would think is first, staff should get it up to date for us to look at. And of course, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the water study we just did and the flood mitigation study we did. So I think that if we can update everything, that would be a great starting point. Then we can put our future hats on and say, okay, this is, because I think there'll be a lot of information
And
coming
then
out with those studies.
Yeah, and in the meantime, if something pops out to you, call it in and let me know, send me an email so we can just include it or have it as a discussion. I think the more eyes we have on this, the better. I mean, there's a lot of things to look at. Obviously, there's gonna be information that we have that you don't have. And you're not gonna have until we put it on the map. But, you know, there are sections in town that you might come across and you say, well, that doesn't really make sense, let's consider that. You know, that's definitely something to look at.
And eventually this is an adopted ordinance by the village. So we want to continue to update it over time, but it is an adopted ordinance once we get that map finished.
And the last time this was updated, what I'm looking at right now is 2009.
But never adopted.
It was never been adopted.
Okay, and then it's obviously missing stuff we've done recently.
Yes.
Okay.
When was the last time the comprehensive plan was adopted?
2018.
Yep. So we got very good starting point there. We got a very good starting point here, and all the supplemental data that you're talking about too.
Because we've already talked about what, 2 reservoirs at well 4 already. Right, and we already know with the mitigation all the way up the valley for P for brewery and the west end. You know, so I mean, we've spent a lot of money on studies, so it's great that we can actually incorporate them in this, have scientific background without spending any more money.
Right.
And flood mitigation is not going to change that much.
Just might get bigger.
Well, yeah, you can think about what I'm saying is, you know, the water's going to flow where the water's going to flow, right? So you got to do something in that area. All righty, everybody good?
Motion to adjourn.
All right, do I have a second?
Second.
All right, all in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, say. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.